Well, hello and welcome to the first and hopefully not the last in our new series of Look Back With. We're going to take a particular classic Grand Prix and have a look back with some of the people that were there on the day and some famous faces that you will know very well. We're going to take you back to the 26th of September 1999. And whilst Bill Clinton was sitting in the White House and Tony Blair was sitting at number 10, Johnny Herbert was sat in a Stewart Grand Prix on his way to victory. Johnny Herbert, the European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. What a race that was.
It certainly was, yes. But what a day! Just because of the way the weather was, really mixed, a lot of confusion from strategy from various teams. But at the end of the day, it was really just trying to survive.
I was sat in a bunker somewhere at Television Centre producing Sunday Sport on 5 for the BBC. Martin Brandl, where were you on that afternoon?
I would have been running up and down the grid, Crofty, embarrassing myself, trying to find somebody to talk to, and then over to the commentary box where I would find His Royal Highness Mr. Murray Walker up there, ready for what was going to be an incredible race and a hugely unpredictable race. And a young man joining us up there called Ted Kravitz as our third man, keeping an eye out on what was going on. And he would also have a very busy afternoon.
He's still a young man now as well. Ted Kravitz, you're looking very well. What was your role in that commentary box?
Can't quite believe how long ago it was, Martin. But yeah, it would have been a changeable weekend in the Eifel Mountains, hadn't it? And I've been working throughout the weekend. We'd been following up. Of course, '99 was the season when Michael Schumacher had broken his leg at Silverstone. Eddie Irvine was going for the championship for Ferrari. Mika Hakkinen had just come to this race from Monza, where he'd made an unforced error, spun at the first chicane and had a little cry in the bushes. So we've been making some features. I've been editing some stuff, and then made my way up to the commentary box for the race as the weather started to chill, Crofty, and the clouds moved in.
Yes, number one that day. Sun is shining. Bob Marley and Funkmaster Deluxe. Johnny, it wasn't really shining that much at the Nürburgring, but let's go through the grid. And first of all, talk about qualifying as well, because it was a very mixed up qualifying. Although you didn't seem to get the best of the conditions. We'll get to your grid spot in a minute. Frentzen on pole, Coulthard on the front row. You're there somewhere.
I am there somewhere, yeah. It was very tricky qualifying because it was damp to start with, and then it was sort of drying as we got nearer the end of the session, and it was just trying to get the right time. And I know Rubens was very unhappy. I think he went out about 35 seconds behind me, but actually it made quite a difference to actually what lap time you were going to do. So it was a real tricky one.
The Nürburgring, Ted Kravitz, is one of those tracks where conditions often play a part. It can be brutally cold. It can be gloriously sunny. There you are, Johnny, 14th on the grid. We're seeing you now. But who was the smart money on, Ted, as we approach the start of the race?
Well, it was impressive, the pole position lap from Heinz-Harald Frentzen. He'd gone with the soft tyres. The McLarens, I think, had gone with the hard tyres, as had Eddie Irvine, which kind of put their qualifying performances into context. They felt that was the better race tyre, and as it was, we never really got to find out, because even though we had those various forecasts, nowhere near as comprehensive as the forecasts we have nowadays in Formula One, nowhere near like the radars we had. It seemed like everyone lining up on the grid thought it was going to be dry.
Well, here we are, second attempt at a start, because Marc Genet and Alex Zanardi lined up in the wrong position, and I think Marc Genet stalled as well before we could get going. But Martin Brandl, it's lights out and away we go. Take us through the start of this race.
Frentzen away well, David Coulthard down the front row not so well. He gets passed by Mika Hakkinen, his teammate, down into turn one, but as you can see, the track is absolutely bone dry. It's quite a quick chicane back in those days, a right left before they extended that circuit. But Damon Hill had an electrical issue, and we saw Alex Burt swerving to miss the back of him, clipped the side of Pedro Diniz's Sauber, and I was very worried in commentary because it looked like either the roll bar had failed or the roll bar had gone into the soft, we'd had a lot of rain, into the soft ground. And you start to think, hang on, are we commentating on a fatality here, or have somebody's broken their neck? It looked absolutely awful. In fact, it was the rollover bar, Crofty, that found. That's Alex Burt making his way back. He'd made contact with two different cars, actually. in his attempts not to ram into the back of Damon Hill as he was slowing down. And they don't want to slam that car back on the ground, because that can do more damage to the driver if he does indeed have any kind of vertebrae issues. And of course, immediately then, with so many people out on track, a car to get away, a driver to get out of that car first, Frenson's amazing lead gets all eaten up by the inevitable safety car.
We'll see the replay in a minute. Johnny, you can talk us through the replay. But Ted, what did happen to that roll bar on Pedro Deniz's car?
No, Martin's absolutely right. It was just that there was forces on it that they hadn't really thought. They thought when they designed these roll hoops, which was effectively a sort of carbon fibre triangle, it's the strongest possible shape, that it would be bouncing up on tarmac. They never expected that it would get the sort of lateral force from the side there that actually just swapped it over. And they changed the rules on roll bars after this as a result of this accident.
So, Johnny, we saw somewhere in the background the two Stewart Grand Prix cars. Very easy to pick out because they're both white and they stand out. Look, there you are, just coming into shot now. Are you ahead of Rubens? Did you get a better start than Rubens in the other Stewart Grand Prix car?
Actually, off of the line, yes. Both of us didn't really get a particularly good start itself. Jean Alesi actually passed, I think, both of us on it itself. I'm on that left-hand side. You see Jean actually going to the right as we look. And then Rubens is just behind me. But as we go into turn one, you've said about Damon having his issue with the engine cutting out, and then I get stuck actually behind him after the instant there of Wirtz, and then of course Pedro Diniz, and there I am getting stuck, and then you see Rubens on my outside actually getting past me there. So yeah, I lost out a couple of places there just purely because I got stuck behind Damon. But at that point, I still wasn't too concerned.
Is it worth adding at this point that 2 of your 3 race victories were due to Damon crashing into Michael Schumacher? Michael Schumacher's not in this race, so he can't crash into him because he'd broken his legs at Silverstone that year, at Stowe, I think it was, the accident. But your old mate Damon Hill did actually play his part in yet another race win for you.
Involved again. Yes, but this one was a little bit different. There was a long way to go after this first corner incident, but there was a lot more to happen as the race went on. And as I said before, it was just really trying to get your head down and do the pace that you could do as consistent as possible. And then it was just watching the weather. There was a lot of talk about rain coming, but no one had any idea when, where, and how.
So here we are, Frentzen, Häkkinen, Coulthard, Schumacher, Fisichella and Panis, the top 6 on lap 6. The safety car has now gone. Häkkinen and Irvine went into this race level on 60 points, Frentzen on 50 points and David Coulthard on 48 in the championship. And at some stage in this race, Martin Brundle, David Coulthard comes into the champion permutations. Heinz-Harald Frentzen comes into the permutations. But for Häkkinen and Irvine, it was a particularly bad afternoon, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Stay tuned, because this race has so many leaders because of rain coming and going and all sorts of driver errors and dramas that will unfold. And yeah, they were all getting a flavour of maybe getting a handy points haul towards the World Championship. This is race 14 out of 16, remember. So we're into the closing part of the season anyway, where it really matters. And, the way it unfolds, it's almost, if you're up for the championship, you're not going to score any points today. It's how it seemed for most of the race later on. It just wouldn't really play into any of the championship contenders' hands. But little Johnny there was sandbagging brilliantly, just minding his own business for the first half of the race, and then delivers the magic when they hand out the champagne and the prizes.
Hang on a minute, Johnny. Sandbagging or stuck behind your teammate? Which one was it?
I'm going to go sandbagging. But yeah, as I said before, it was just, I could see Rubens was in front, and then it was just I had a long battle with Jean Alesi, following Jean for a long while. Then I got in front of Jean, then we had a few passes over each other. But it was just, as I said before, just keeping that consistency as much as you could and trying to keep as close as I could at that point anyway to Rubens.
we just went on board with Ralf Schumacher, I was watching back with Murray and Martin's commentary. Ted Kravitz, Murray Walker was the president's secretary and member number 1 of the Ralf Schumacher fan club on this particular afternoon. I think when we went on board, he exclaimed, "Right, let's ride along with Ralphie." What had Ralph done to get such praise from Murray, Ted, on that particular afternoon?
Well, we all called Ralphie because that was his nickname. But I think the affection was as much for Ralph as for Williams. You know, they hadn't had a great season up to then. They were in that sort of interim, weren't they, between when Renault left them as work suppliers. They had a Supertech engine, which was still effectively the same engine, but privateer engine before they made the leap to BMW in the 2000s. But a couple of things. Just caught a scene on that Deniz accident. Of course, Martin Prof Watkins was still there, wasn't he? Sid Watkins was there with a Brazilian medical driver whose name escapes me. Johnny, you probably remember who that was. And first shot we'll get of Norbert on the Mercedes pit wall today.
Yes, Norbert Haug, the head of Mercedes-Benz Motorsport. Back to his moustache and mullet in a moment. Here's the first racing incidents following the resumption, and that's Ricardo Zonta in the other Williams facing the wrong way. And at this stage, Martin Brundle, Alex Zanardi in the other Williams facing the wrong way. At this stage, Martin Brundle, you swore blind that we get the safety car out yet again to get rid of that Williams.
Yeah, and I don't think I've changed my mind too much, Crofty. Zanardi had a terrible season at Williams, didn't he? Having been so amazing over in IndyCar racing. And they're steaming round. They're about 4 or 5 corners now from the incident. Marshall's on track, stationary car around the outside of what's quite a quick final turn, especially there. You're really powering on. And nothing happened. They just covered it under what I think is a single wave yellow. It was a really sort of clumsy move there. They all managed to, 3 into 1 doesn't go. In fact, they all managed to touch at some point, and left others to thread through the middle of them. And look, the race carried on with all those marshals trying to push that thing through the gravel traps. Now that would be anyway just tarmac runoff area, and Fisichella will have wished there was tarmac runoff area there too, because he loses out.
What was Murray's commentary? Right, Irvine uncorked. He can fly, Eddie Irvine, which he does start to do. Fisichella was very much holding him up. It's not an easy track, Johnny, to get past another driver. This version of the Nürburgring.
No, again, very, very flowy, and again, very difficult to even going down towards turn 1, there's through turn 1, turn 2, and the exit. And then as you shoot down towards turn 3, there isn't really enough long enough straight to be able to make that pass. So you just got to put the pressure on the driver in front, and hopefully you'll be there at that sort of final chicane and have a chance of going up the inside there. But what's lovely, you were talking about Fisichella going off a few times as we'll see during the race, but isn't it great to see all this gravel and grass and the difficulty that it made for everybody? This was the real test for everybody. You could not go off of that tarmac, because as soon as you went on that grass, you were losing seconds, absolutely seconds.
Forget the gravel and grass, Ted Kravitz. Wasn't it great to see the umbrellas coming up? Because this is where it starts to get interesting. Down comes the rain for the first time.
You always know it's the TV. Oh, we get a little replay here. TV director's favourite shot is to let everybody know that, the rain's coming. Is somebody opening a brolly or putting a little cagoule on? Commentators like you, Crofty, that is a gift, isn't it, those shots?
But you do.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, as a driver, Crofty, as a driver, you see that. You see, your hair drivers talking to you. David Coulthard managed to save this one around the outside. I was pretty convinced he was going to get a little tag there from Ralf Schumacher, but, drivers notice all the faces looking the other way if there's an incident up the track somewhere, or starting to get their little raincoats on or umbrellas up. It is, when you've got a few thousand people in a grandstand, you do notice that sort of thing anyway. But I think it's the old way of showing us that it's starting to rain. But Ralf Schumacher, really feist, isn't he? Driving a great race.
Oh, yeah.
His brother Michael, he was so amazing around this track. He even designed parts of it. to which he really liked himself. And of course, Eddie Irvine carrying the baton for Ferrari with Michael out with his injuries from Stowe at Silverstone, as you pointed out. And driving beautifully is Ralph, but it's starting to get very slippery, as we see now Fisichella having his second adventure of the race so far.
He spent more time on the grass than a man with a ride-on lawnmower, quite frankly, that afternoon. Johnny, if you can see the crowd putting the brollies up and getting the emergency ponchos in readiness as well, what's going on in the cockpit? Are you saying, right, okay, guys, I'm going to need wet tyres, as Ralf Schumacher has a brilliant move down the inside once again with David Coulthard and sets up one of the overtakes of the race here? We'll get your answer in a minute, Johnny, because I think it's worth looking at one of Ralph's best overtakes in Formula One. Not only Martin getting past DC, but avoiding Mika Hakkinen as well.
Yeah, difficult conditions. They've got 4 grooves in the front tyres back then in the Bridgestones. And, he had to judge it up against David Coulthard. And it would have been so easy to run into Hakkinen there. Mika, the range of your mirrors looks just over your own rear tyre. So he was a long way to the right, was Ralph. And Mika would have had no idea he was out there and would have been completely surprised had he been wiped out. So it was great judgment there from Ralf Schumacher in what is clearly quite challenging conditions with a bit of wet and dry going on.
So you can see the rain's coming, Johnny. Are you starting to say to your pit crew, right, stand by with the wet tyres, guys, I'm going to need some?
You mean talk to my pit crew? No. That didn't happen back in those days.
Oh, really?
It was very small. It was very small radio communication, and it was generally set off by the driver himself. But you can see a little bit of spray at the sort of the pit end of the circuit. And the problem is, as I think we all know, and Martin especially, it rains generally at one end or the other. And this is what happened on this first sort of sprinkle of rain that we had. It was sort of drier at the far end, but a lot of people decided, and I think that must be Mika going in there. Yeah. And he chose, right, this is that chance that we're going to have because rain is going to come our way. But all I do remember is standing on the grid, and as you were looking down towards turn 1, there was a massive strong wind coming directly up the straight. And about 30 kilometres beyond turn 1 is Spa. And we always generally know the weather will always come in that direction. But I just remember how straight that wind wasn't a crosswind in any shape or form, directly up that pit lane. And that was something I was able to use to my advantage a little bit later on.
Because in terms of the area of this Nürburgring track, Ted, it's not very wide in terms of the area that it covers, but it is quite long. It's a short lap, but from the highest point to the lowest point, it's quite long. So it's unusual that if the weather came in, it didn't hit the whole track. But that seemed to be the case for much of this afternoon, that actually the weather didn't affect the whole track at any one time.
It's just a sort of a long track, isn't it? It's like an elongated banana. But Salo, having the first of 2 fairly disastrous Ferrari pit stops there, needed a new front wing, obviously, so that would have cost 12 seconds or so. But Ferrari having a really bad day operationally, which is unusual because this, of course, was the thick in the years of Ross Brawn, Nigel Stepney, of course. The late Nigel Stepney was corralling things at Ferrari, whipping everybody into shape. And so operationally they were normally on it, but they were having a nightmare. I think while they decided whether to keep with the dry tyres or go with the wets, as we see with Irvine a bit later.
So look at the main straight, Martin. Oh, go on, Johnny, first.
One thing, Crofty, on that as well is obviously I chose to stay on the slick tyres, but as you can see in the pit lane there, it's pretty dry. But actually on the other side of the circuit where you've got that Michael Schumacher chicane, it's absolutely soaking wet. So that was where there was sort of this big jump to try and get the wet tyres on as early as they could. And actually, it was definitely the wrong thing because 3/4 of the track was still dry.
Yeah, and it was definitely the wrong thing to bring Eddie Irvine in so soon after Mika Salo, because they hadn't got enough tyres waiting for him. Boy, did this cost Eddie Irvine dear in this race. A full, nearly half a minute, Martin, whilst they found a 4th tyre for him.
Yeah, and remember, he's co-leading the World Championship with 2 races to go. It looked like Keystone Cops, didn't it? And like described it commentary on the day as like they're having a committee meeting about which tyres to put on this car. A normal pit stop back then with refueling was around 7 seconds. So they're giving away, Salo gave away over half a minute, for example, while they tried to make their minds up which tyres to put on the car. As we see Ralph bouncing across the grass there, everybody struggling to slow down. And that, bear in mind that Häkkinen only won this World Championship by 2 World Championship points. That was a very costly moment there for Irvine and Ferrari. And before we laugh about Ferrari too much, they went on to win the Constructors' title in this 1999 season.
So Mika Häkkinen's on the wets. Eddie Irvine's just passed him there, and you heard the cheers of the crowd in the background. And this is the main straight. It's bone dry on the main straight, and just a couple of 100 metres to the left, to the final chicane, the final corner, and it's like Bambi on ice down there, Johnny. It is absolutely ludicrous to think that in such a short area, the conditions can be so different. But how was your Stewart car handling as we see the Ferrari into the pits again in these wet conditions here? Were you like Mika and David Coulthard here, were you going off the track, or were you managing to stay on somehow?
No, I was managing to stay on somehow, but as I said, it was all about trying to get the balance of the car correct, which is all the work that we done sort of on the Friday and maybe early Saturday. But it was then really trying to make sure you didn't lock up at the same point, because that will always put you straight into a horrible situation. So everything from the car, the feedback it was giving me was really, really positive. So I was able to just do the job I needed to do, even in that tricky part of the circuit on those slick tyres. And because of that, I was able to keep at a very good pace where others were making all those small errors. So again, it's just about keeping your head and being able to just carry on and consistently do the job that you need to do. It's always something I've always done. Probably my racecraft was always my strongest part compared to qualifying. So when I'm in a race situation, I've always got a positive mentality.
So that's Mika coming in to get rid of the wet tyres, which was a disastrous call. Was that, Ted, was that Ron Dennis's call to make, or was it Mika's call? Did you get to the bottom of that after the race?
I seem to remember that McLaren, well, they certainly split their strategy, didn't they? The Coulthard stayed out on dries, Mika went for the wets, and Ralf Schumacher coming in now as well from second position. This is still on dries, so this would have been a little bit later. He needed some fuel as well, but it's difficult to forget that. And Johnny, you talk about this. In a day like this, when qualifying position doesn't matter, it's all about making those right calls at the right time. And while it was Steve Hallam, I think, who was Mika Häkkinen's engineers, he would have made the decision with input from Ron Dennis. I don't think Ron Dennis was in charge so much that he was making the decision. But who was making those decisions, Johnny, between you and your engineer? Who was your engineer at the time?
Well, Andy LeFleming was my engineer, good old Andy. And, we just always have that normal chat before the race itself. We knew about rain was possibly going to come our way. So we had a strategy just when it was going to be dry, which was a couple of stops. Now, when it's down to what happens on the racetrack itself, personally, I don't know about you, Martin, but there are occasions like this particular race, is the drivers on the circuit, we know as a driver there's only probably a quarter of the track wet, 3/4 is dry. Why would you want to come into the pits to change tyres when you're going to be overall way quicker by seconds? So you stay up on track, you keep yourself and your nose clean, and you try and get away from all the mistakes that might happen in that tricky part of the track. So overall, you as a driver know what's happening on the track. I always find it sometimes amazing that people in the pits think they know more than what the driver does actually on the racetrack itself.
Yeah, it's an issue, isn't it? If you're sitting on the pit wall and it's literally bouncing off the top of your Pratt perch, as they're known as, on the pit wall there, and your driver's whinging a little bit and you're feeling a bit edgy, you need to get the tyres changed. Or, if they're following their weather forecast a little bit too keenly and not using a bit of common sense on it, it's hindsight's a wonderful thing here, and it's all, you can easily look a fool, you can easily look a hero, and they're leaving the pits. Prost having a particularly good day, having struggled with this car. But you're right, Johnny. At the end of the day, it's the driver's confidence in, have I got enough grip? Can I keep enough tyre temperature in the dry bits to survive the wet bits? And do I think I can keep this on the road? And is it net faster? What the team should be doing is telling you, Charlie Hummingtop's on wets. He's actually 10 seconds a lap faster than you. And you only need 3 laps, and you've wasted a pit stop anyway. So you do have to work together. But I agree with you. The driver's gut feeling and opinion from all of the track, rather than just the bits that somebody else can see, should really overrule anything else.
So that was Olivier Panis's second stop that we saw in the Prost team. He did the same as Mika Häkkinen, who was busy getting lapped here, this time by Giancarlo Fisichella. Whilst David Coulthard was setting fastest lap after fastest lap, Mika Häkkinen had kind of gone to sleep a little bit, Martin, hadn't he?
He had a weird day, as Ted pointed out earlier on. He had that awful incident in Monza where we saw him crying his eyes out. The helicopter caught him. He thought he was hiding in the bushes when he was crying his eyes out. And of course, they had this bad tyre call early on in this race, then had to put that right with another pit stop. And Mika just went on the missing list, didn't he, for the bulk of this race for some reason. He didn't appear to have pace, even when he was on the right tyre. Now, this is Frentzen. He's got out of shape going in to the chicane and just bolts down the runoff area and keeps his position. And this is a bit of a bugbear of mine. We know you're not allowed to gain a place under those circumstances by shooting off down an escape road. But I think equally, if you fail to lose a place, as Frentzen did there, you really, the stewards ought to be having a look at that. But how do you measure that? Eddie is like, no, of course it's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But, Jordan are having a great season here. Frentzen's on form too. And that was a margin goal. But the rules don't allow for if you fail to lose a place. It's only if you quite clearly gained a place. But Frentzen recognised early that he wasn't going to make it in the braking zone and just floored the throttle and went through the old chicane instead.
It's the European Grand Prix, but we are at the Nürburgring. You're a brave man in the stewards' room if you give Heinz-Harald Frentzen a penalty for gaining an advantage by having to take to the runoff area because the track's a little bit greasy. Although, to be fair, Mercedes were powering the McLaren, so either way, if you're a German fan, you're on for a bit of a win there. And that was a second shot, Ted Kravitz, of the famous Norbert Haug mullet and moustache combination on the pit wall there. The Mercedes brought the big boys, and I don't just mean Norbert, but from Stuttgart down to this race to sit on their own pit wall. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. Just remember how important in context this race was for McLaren Mercedes. BMW they knew was coming in the next year or so. Actually, at the Nürburgring, there's a big BMW sign that you pass on your way in. They actually have to cover that up when the race comes, so as not to embarrass Mercedes. And that whole grandstand at Turn 1 was the Mercedes grandstand, the Mercedes Tribune, as we see. Is that Häkkinen and Fisichella? It is.
Yeah, that happened about 2 laps previous. Häkkinen getting lapped by Fisichella.
Yeah, there was a lot of expectation. You saw Norbert Haug, you saw Mario Ilian, the engine boss, you saw Dr. Zetscher, who was head of Mercedes-Benz at the time, and he recently retired, and Norbert Haug, of course, with the tash and the mullet, on the Mercedes pit wall stand. Mercedes had 2 pit walls at most races, actually. And normally it was Norbert sitting by himself on the Mercedes one, while Ron Dennis and Davey Ryan sat on the McLaren one. But he was in good company. Mercedes were desperate to win this race.
So we're on about lap 32, 33. There was no lap counter on the world feed in those days. So we're approaching half race distance. It was a 65 lap race because we had an extra formation lap after the Genet Zanardi muck up at the start. But let's play a little game now as we approach half distance. It's a brand new game we're going to play called Where's Johnny? So look, here come the leaders, Frentzen and Coulthard, in for their pit stop. And great work this was by the crews. Round about a 7-second pit stop, bit of fuel, change the tyres, get the boys out there again. And out goes Frentzen. Johnny, you're down where? 12th, 13th at the moment?
Yeah, something like that. But I think what's interesting for me around this point, remember I was talking about that wind directly up the straight? Well, I do remember seeing this massive black cloud way over towards Spa. So actually for the next sort of 10 laps...
Hang on, Johnny.
Frentzen. Whoa.
Hang on. That black cloud somewhere hovering over the Jordan pit wall, I think. That's Heinz-Harald Frentzen. There they are, there's the black cloud. Eddie Jordan not liking that. He's seen not one but two drivers stop at exactly the same place for Martin Brandl, exactly the same reason. And the second time, his man was actually leading the race.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been another great day here for Jordan in what was a strong season. Feeling very sorry there for Eddie. You know, he's like Jackie Stewart and Paul Stewart. EJ went into Formula One, had all sorts of trials and tribulations, but managed to win a Grand Prix. Can you imagine now as starting up as privateers and ending up winning races? An amazing achievement for them. So a difficult day, really, because, you know, prize money would have been involved here, and he would always have needed the prize money, the points, the opportunity. Frentzen had a shout with the championship as well. So that is a particularly cruel twist of fate for the Jordan team.
Oh, so sad.
Once again,
to see that.
Go
on, Martin.
Once again, Crofty, vehicles on the track and tow ropes and just covered under a single waved yellow. How things have changed.
Yeah, and for the better, it has to be said. So these are the cars not running after 33 laps. Frentzen and Hill, both for Jordan. Zinardi out for Williams, Alex Wirtz and Pedro Diniz because of that incident at the first corner. Let's go back then, Johnny, with David Coulthard now leading to your big black cloud. Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? And how many times a lap are you looking at it?
Well, DC should be looking at it because it was so big. I remember it was so dark. And I just knew that it was coming away. Now, I had no idea if it was going to drop any rain on the racetrack itself. But I just remember, monitor that. Every lap you come by, just sort of see where it's at. And then you'll have a good idea of what direction it's going in. And there I am. Yeah, going into...
yeah, there you are. You're fifth. Because of all the pit stops, you're now fifth. And the rain's starting to come down again. So... yeah. At this stage, you're thinking, well, I didn't come in before. I ought to come in now, surely, as we see another great Williams and Mercedes battle going on, coming out of the hairpin.
But how dark is that down that far end, Crofty? How dark is that? It was chucking it down. Really, real buckets of it coming down. I was very lucky as well. It was actually, I was called in to do my pit stop, so it was on my in lap. And when I got down that far end, as I said, it was throwing it down. So I went, that cloud, there she is. She's going to go directly over the whole circuit. It's worth a gamble. And I went on the radio. I said, wets, wets, wets. And I carried that for probably the next 20 or so seconds. And I collected my wet tyres. Perfect timing.
You shout wet, wet, wet. Marty Pella will come and serenade you at the end of that one, Johnny, as Salo goes off. Ted, is there a bit of a scramble in the commentary box at this stage? Because now lots and lots of people are coming into the pit stop, and it's your job to help Murray and Martin work out exactly who's on what tyres at that time.
Yeah, well, that's right. They didn't need much help because they're the best in the business. Your good self excluded, of course, Crofty. They're the best in the business. But no, it was just keeping an idea of who was on what tyre. Of course, James Allen was doing that down in the pits as well, with Louise Goodman doing the interviews. And it was just keeping an eye on it. But I think at the time, Johnny, I seem to remember more people were tipping Rubens, who was higher up than you, for a podium, or maybe even more than that. What was the edge you had on Rubens this day?
Well, I get one of them is making this decision, because Rubens came in a lap or two after me, actually. So I'd chosen the wets. And when Rubens came in, they put slicks on the car, and that was, as we know, with everybody else, the wrong decision. But that was 1 lap or 2 laps even after me. But it's as it was before. Remember when we were saying, well, it was only really that final chicane part of the track that was wet. This was the whole track, and it was pretty much soaked. So I just knew that was going to be the risk worth taking.
So here's David Coulthard in the McLaren. Ralf Schumacher, we saw his pit crew waiting for him as well. That's DC staying out on the track for another lap, which seems very strange. We've got another retiree from the race. Is that another Sauber?
Lacey.
Yeah, it is, the Lacey in the Sauber, who's given up. One thing that strikes me when we watch back these races, not just because of the accidents, the amount of mechanical failures that we used to have in Formula One, the amount of retirements for things that just go wrong during the race. But Martin Brandl, your man DC's driving a stellar race at the moment, but with conditions like this, you know, he's not only are you his manager at this moment, but he's also your good mate as well. Are you a little bit worried for him?
No, not at all. I managed DC's commercial affairs for 11 years, but I hope I always kept it completely separate to my commentary work, and very few people actually knew that, and nor did they need to know it. I don't like it when managers try to big themselves up. It's not about the manager, but as his manager and as the man that negotiated DC a win bonus, of which I got, you know, a little bit of a tip from myself, shall we say, a bit of a humble amount. I was rather gutted when we cut to this shot, and DC's touched the white line with the right front tyre, locked it up. When a tyre is not rotating, when it's locked up, you haven't got retardation. And it's the silliest little accident, bit of grass, bit of gravel. Now it's downhill and bouncing. The anti-stall mechanisms weren't that efficient back then. So you can see from the rear axle, the engine's dead. So he didn't have a chance to try to reverse out of there. And that's, another driver that, along with Frentzen, who could have won this race quite comfortably. And unusual for David, because he was such a silky smooth driver. And these were his conditions, but just a tiny bit too close to the white line, which, as we know, is always a bit slipperier anyway when it's wet than the racetrack. And there he was, hero to zero.
It's not that I didn't want you to win, Johnny, but I was absolutely gutted at that stage, because David Coulthard, he was the only one of the championship contenders in the points, and would have been 2 points behind Mika Hakkinen had he managed to win and Mika not score any points. But DC's loss on the day is your gain, because now you're up into the podium places, as we can see.
Yeah, and again, mainly down to that tyre choice we were talking about, and really because I was gaining probably 5-8 seconds a lap, and that was why I was able to sort of just make up so much ground. The car was working so well when it was dry, but especially in the wet. And I think from the feelings I was getting, I thought, right, this is a chance of getting a good finish. Probably was I thinking about a race win? Realistically, probably not, but I knew a good result was on the cards.
And somehow, Ted Kravitz, Giancarlo Fisichella was in second place, despite yet another excursion onto the grass.
Yeah, despite all of his offs, and this was before Flavio managed to turn Benetton, or soon to be Renault, into a winning machine once again after Michael Schumacher left. So it was Alex Wurz and Giancarlo Fisichella. And Fisi was one of those drivers, wasn't he, guys, where he would turn up, and often the first lap he drove in Friday practice would be pretty much as fast as he was ever going to go. Alan Permain always used to sort of talk about this, didn't he? Whatever you threw, whatever difference you put on the car, he would always pretty much go the same quick speed as he went all weekend. But did that glare, Johnny, that glare from the wet track and the low sun, did that affect you as Ralf comes into the pits for a second stop in the lead?
No, the glare isn't a problem. It's something you're not really focusing on, so you're just looking what's happening sort of further down the road, and you've always got a sort of a little bit of a tint in your visor as well, so it doesn't actually cause any issues, Ted.
So Ralf comes into the pits. He's leading the race at this stage. Fisichella's 20-second gap to Johnny Hubert has disappeared because he went off onto the grass. Ralph rejoins the race now behind yourself, Johnny. And Fisichella, Martin Brandl, is the new leader of the race.
Yeah, despite all of his adventures, it's a question of who's got any tyres left. I mean, Johnny, every time I see Johnny's car, he says it was handling really well, but it looks like he's driving around the outside of a 50-pence piece constantly. The back end's all over the place. And it's like the steering column's connected to the rear axle, not the front axle. But I was leaning on those wet tyres, and obviously you were right up. You sensed this result, Johnny, and or some kind of result, as you said. You were right on the edge of grip. Every time we've cut to you, you've been really, squeezing the throttle right on the limit of the rear tyre of slide, if you like, angle of slide. And it is, the car looks quite lively, I must say, but you were obviously happy with it.
Yeah, but I think, as you know, Martin, sometimes a twitchy car is a fast car. But if it's a twitchy car that you can control, that is always a sort of a big plus. And luckily that day, twitchy, but fast enough.
Yeah, I don't think that twitchy arrows was particularly fast. And I don't think those wheel tethers were particularly effective either. There's Takagi out of the race and causing an accident all by himself. And the tyre rolling down the track all by itself as well. Which is, fortunately, another thing you don't see very often.
Easy to forget here, Crofty, that Ralf Schumacher at this point was fueled to the end of the race. So that was the last stop he was going to make. And so he was third and still in touching distance of Fisichella, and Johnny. So really, had everything gone okay from this point on, it would have been a race win for Williams.
Did Fisichella have to stop again?
I think he did. I think with Johnny, I don't think he had enough fuel to get to the end. Yeah.
No, we're never know.
Here we go, Johnny. Watch your rear mirrors, Johnny. Ralf Schumacher's coming for you.
Never look in your mirrors, Crofty. Just look where you're going. It's up to them to be able to get past you. So, but this was interesting because I'm on that dry line. Ralph is on that wet line, and I knew he had no chance of trying to slip it down the inside because he would have just shot off straight into the gravel at turn 1.
But you're expecting him to get you sooner or later, surely, because he's all over the back of you.
Yeah, and as we see, wasn't he driving well? It was really, actually looking back, really good to see. This was probably one of his best races, if not the best race he ever had, unfortunately, with an issue that he has a little bit later on. But overall, it was, great to do a little bit of wheel-to-wheel battle with him, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Nice memory.
And he's on the dry tyres, of course, which explains the pace difference, or explains some of the pace difference between you. But you've got Fisichella right there as well. He's getting tangled up with a few back markers. Do you look back now and think, blimey, this was the trickiest race that I ever had to drive in? Or were you nice and calm and confident at the time and not really worried about what was going on around you?
No, not worried about what was going on around me. It's like everything Martin knows very well. You have a lot of experience in worse conditions than this, and because of that, that's where you learn your way of going into a race and the strength that you carry from that experience. So that was exactly my mindset. I knew it was going to be tough. We all knew that prior to the race starting anyway, with the forecast that was looking to come our way. It did come our way, and then it was just keeping that concentration typically as high as you possibly could.
Is this you coming in again?
Yeah.
It is. So this will be onto the slicks.
Crofty, easy to forget. Stewart were in their third year of existence. They came in 1997. It was Jan Magnussen, wasn't it? One of their first drivers.
Yeah.
And Rubens had been with them for a while. You joined in what, year 2 or 3, Johnny?
3.
Yeah. But it was a tidy car by now. Designed who designed it? And it had the first of the really, really powerful Ford Cosworth engines. They called them micro engines at the time, but they were the same size as everyone else's, but they were just lighter, which really helped.
Yeah, well, it's Alan Jenkins who actually designed the car, and he wasn't sadly with us for that season. Gary Anderson came into Stewart and joined the team that season, so it was an Alan car. I always say thanks to Alan whenever I see him. And there is Fisichella again.
See, It's the curse of the
Again.
European Grand Prix in '99. Who wants to lead this race? I mean, I wouldn't want to lead this race because every time you do, you head out and that's it, you're off. And this is Fisichella. It was his fourth or fifth time onto the grass and last because Martin, he couldn't save this one. It was one excursion too many.
Yeah, he was obviously pushing hard. He's a very young man back then. He still races today for the Works Ferrari team in at Le Mans, for example. But you'd think he would have learned his lesson this far into the Grand Prix. They just kept making fundamental errors. So he obviously had a lot of speed, a lot of talent. Car was working well. They'd obviously pitted at good times. And still he managed to throw it in the hedge, which was a great shame for the young man. But he would go on to win Grand Prix. This was one that got away.
A shot of Rocco Benetton there. As exasperated, as Giancarlo Fisichella, who stayed just on the outside of the track until afterwards. And Ralf Schumacher into the lead of the race. Oh no, there's another driver going off, and this time it's a puncture. So he's picked up a puncture from somewhere, and I don't know what the explanation was after the race, Ted. Was it debris on the track, or was it just a tyre failure? But I mean, absolutely heartbreaking this for Ralf Schumacher.
It was. I remember. You expect at this moment when you see this, Patrick Head to be absolutely doing his nut in the Williams garage, and actually he wasn't. When things go really bad, Patrick just he got down from the pit wall. I remember I could see out the commentary box window, just went into the garage, just checked they had the tyres ready. But he was quite sanguine about it, although obviously he would have been furious inside. I don't think they ever found out whether it was a cut from something or other, but who do we have here now?
But who cares? It's all in the past now. This is the present, well, the present on our look back. Johnny Herbert leads the European Grand Prix.
Yeah, there was a bit of a smile on my face when I went past Ralph with 3 wheels on his wagon. Really didn't really matter, but at the end of the day, you were talking a bit earlier on, Ted, about that engine. It was, I have to say, a brilliant piece of engineering. Very small, like you said, created a lot of horsepower, but its drivability was fantastic, wet, and more importantly in the wet. So overall, Ford put a brilliant, and Cosworth put a brilliant package in the back of that Alan Jenkins Stuart Ford.
And what were the emotions with you and Murray in the commentary box, Martin, with Johnny now leading the race? Johnny Herbert of Romford, who I think Murray used to call him.
Well, it's one of those races, a bit like Hockenheim last year. You didn't know what was going to happen next, and you're trying to keep up with all of the action, looking at the gaps and who might, who pitted when, how long did they have the fuel nozzle on, how far might they go. Poor old Ralph there got the puncture going into turn 3. Had so far to go to get back to the pits. Luckily, it didn't break up and flail and rip his bodywork apart. You see the fuel flap up there, which it used to do when they had to come up when the pit lane speed limiter was on, and off Schumacher goes again. He'll show tremendous pace, but he's lost way too much time. So I think yes, of course, there were 22 cars on this grid, and you're excited for all 22 of them, and you are desperately trying to keep hold of what is a fast-moving race and try to understand it, see who might be coming through. As a commentator, as you know, Crofty, the worst scenario is if somebody suddenly pops up and is standing on the podium shaking the champagne and you've not noticed them coming through at any point or how they got there. Indeed, that's the misery, that's the embarrassment. So you've got to keep an eye on the whole field, and especially on a day like today, because as Johnny pointed out earlier on, if you're on the right tires, you might be making 8-10 seconds a lap over somebody, and it was that kind of day, a race to keep hold of.
Very similar. You mentioned Germany last year. I think Lance Stroll was last at one stage in that race, and he led for about half a lap when the rains came down. But let's get back to the European Grand Prix. Ralph's gone down to 4th now. Luca Badoa is up into 5th place. Mika Häkkinen's woken up because he senses that there might just be a point or a couple of points up for grabs. Ralph is going to go on the charge of all charges. Mika Häkkinen's behind you, Johnny. I assume you let him unlap himself because you didn't want anyone to be putting you off, because you're now leading the race and you'd like to stay there till the end.
Yeah, no need to fight anybody, especially someone who's not in the race itself for the lead or for the podium, that is. So yes, it was just focusing on exactly what I'd done for many, many years before, just keeping that concentration there. I had a nice gap to Jarno and Rubens, about 20 odd seconds, I think it was. And I just wanted to keep that distance, no more, no less. And that is where the concentration then becomes the most important factor, because when you're talking about Ralph having that puncture, you do feel for Ralph when he goes off there. When Fisichella goes off, you actually don't feel for Fisichella because he has made that error once, but obviously 4 or 5 times before that. So that's where, when a driver is unlucky like Ralph was, you do feel for them, but not somebody who makes an actual driver error.
Martin said there, Ted, you don't want to be a fool and not mention a driver before he stands on the podium or plays an important part of the race. I'm glad I got the name Luca Badoa in just before we see this, because it's another Mika Häkkinen moment. This time we're not in the bushes at Monza, though.
Oh, poor Luca Badoa. You know, he was better than many people thought. He's absolutely distraught there. He had that late call up to the works Ferrari, didn't he? Towards the end of his career, that arguably might have ended his career, and people kind of took the mickey out of him for not being particularly fast there then. But he was a good little peddler, one of the good Italian ones of his time. Gutted to be there. But Johnny, I remember in the commentary box, you know, we were seeing us Johnny Herbert in there now. I mean, I don't know how you were feeling, but we were feeling that you have got this one under control. Paul Stewart is one of the most chilled out men you know about now, but biting his nails down there. But you must have been feeling like this one was under control, weren't you?
Yeah, totally so. You know, I'd been very lucky, obviously, winning a couple of races before, but again, it's all down to that experience and using that experience in the positive way. And with the gap I had, as I said, over Jarno, it just made my race that much more simple. I'd had no real pressure. The only pressure was only going to be on myself making a stupid mistake. I was aware of that, so the focus was just keeping everything the same probably every single lap, but making sure the car got to the end of that race at the same time. Not over curbs, not being totally stupid like that, for example. So off the curbs, braking nice and smooth and soft, not locking up any brakes, and making sure that the engine got to the end as well. A few early shifts as well, just to help her on her way.
And Martin, it could have been a Stewart 1-2 if Rubens Barrichello managed to get past Jarno Trulli. And Martin Brandl, he was giving it absolutely everything, wasn't he?
Mm. He was. Trulli was driving in a very impressive way, I have to say, in terms of placing his car well, very defensively. Rubens clearly the faster package at this phase of the Grand Prix. Does fancy a 1-2. Probably a bit miffed that his teammate, Mr. J. Herbert, is out front and leading and about to win Stewart's only Grand Prix after Rubens has been there a little while. So, he desperately wants past this Prost, doesn't he? And, you know, look what we've got in the top 3. A Stewart, a Prost and a Stewart. 2 amazing world champions in their own right. So Jackie Stewart and Alain Prost, of course. Just to add to the fabric and excitement of this race, those 2 great champions, and their cars are fighting it out for this victory today. But Trulli had got enough pace and enough guile to stay in second place.
Oh, it's just absolutely superb. We're on to the final lap now. Mika Häkkinen has just got past Marc Genet. So Minardi did get a point in this race, but it was with Marc Genet. Häkkinen picks up a couple of points. Luca Badoa, by the way, never scored a single point in Formula One. This was his big opportunity, and it went away from him. Johnny, you are somewhere on the far side of the track. You are cruising your way to victory while Rubens here hustles and harries Jarno Trulli as much as he possibly can. Go on, Rubens, send it down the inside. No, he couldn't quite make that stick. And you're working out what you're going to say at the victory press conference here. And I would imagine just enjoying that feeling that not many drivers have ever got to feel in Formula One. And that is, you know, I'm going to be a 3-time Grand Prix winner. I'm going to go and win another race. And I'm going to just make the most of this one.
Yeah, no, definitely so, Crofty. And again, it was again another historic racetrack as well, with the modern Grand Prix circuit we have, and of course the Nordschleife that we all love as well. And going into that last turn, it was just knowing that I was going to cruise over to the right-hand side or the left-hand side as we look to see my crew, Andy LaFlemme, my engineer, Jackie Stewart there at the same time, just to sort of, get that final victory for myself, but of course the Stewart Grand Prix at the same time with my Jackie Stewart glasses on.
With Jackie Stewart glasses.
They are
very smooth, Johnny Herbert.
Have you got the trousers? Have you got the trousers on?
Proper.
No, I have. There's a set somewhere, but I have got them, but they're not on. No.
So someone's got the salt tire down on the pit wire. Yeah. So someone managed to produce that one. Commiserations to Ralf Schumacher, who drove a super race and through no fault of his own was denied a victory on a home track, not the home race, because it was the European Grand Prix, of course. Mika Hakkinen, 2 precious points in the World Championship for him. Could have been a different afternoon for Mika, Martin, had he, A, made the right call earlier on in the race, but B, not just dropped off in that mysterious way that he did for so long.
Yeah, he was a bit out of sorts, wasn't he? But that 2 points, remembering, 2 races later, he will take his second consecutive World Championship by 2 points. So they were pretty handy at the end of the day. And points only went down to 6th place back then as well. We've noticed a lot of differences. So many people in the pit lane during the pit stops anymore. Cars and vehicles all over the track. When there's been incidents, the engines did sound amazing. Those groove slicks. I mean, it's 21 years ago, but so many differences. But, it was hard to get in the points back then, just with the top 6.
Now, when I was a local radio reporter many, many years ago, our local racing team was Paul Stewart Racing, who then went on to become Stewart Grand Prix, and I still live about 10 miles away from the old factory as well. They were a brilliant little team, and it was great to see them triumph here. I remember going to the opening of the factory, which of course Red Bull are now at as well, and somewhere I've still got the commemorative letter opener that Jackie gave out that day. But the likes of Stewart Grand Prix, we might never see it again. Johnny Herbert, we're a small team that in their first season they had to actually lodge in the car park, didn't they, in Monaco, because there was no room for them down in the pit lane. But in their third and final season of Stewart Grand Prix, here they are as a bona fide race-winning team. It was just magnificent to see.
Yeah, it was. And again, Paul Stewart, I remember being on the radio after the race, and of course Andy LaFlemme, my engineer, at the same time. It was so noisy in the background. It was really hard to hear them as I was driving around. So the emotion was so high, because again, it was a lovely surprise. Jackie had a wonderful history in Formula One at the Nürburgring, more in the Nordschleife part of the circuit, but overall the emotions were brilliant. There was some champagne. I know Jackie had been hoarding around for the last sort of 3 or so years, and this was that occasion to finally crack the bottles open.
Johnny, can I ask Johnny? We all know you smashed your feet up horribly in Formula 3000 before you still amazingly got to Formula 1, and we'll see you bouncing up and down on the podium or whatever. But did that affect you during this race? Because you had the dexterity you needed during this Grand Prix, and I don't know how you ever carried on racing any cars, let alone standing on the top step of a podium.
Yeah, I don't know how I did it either, to be perfectly honest. But the main thing I always had, weirdly, I think at 97, 80, 98% of my races was my toe got severed off and it was stitched back on. I had a lot of callus. So when I was doing the throttle of the brake, I could only do right foot braking. It was very, very painful for probably about the last 12 laps. So I just had to try and reduce the pressure on the toe, adjust how I put my feet onto the pedals as well. But it was something worth the pain and worth going through that pain threshold.
I'll stand up for it, Crofty. We should stand up first.
You stand.
I'll stand.
Good man.
Weren't you thin there, Johnny? But Johnny, how does it feel to watch all this back now?
What's that mean? Sorry, Ted.
I don't think you look a day older, personally.
Thank you, Grofty.
And Johnny, you've still got the trophy behind you. Come on, get the trophy out.
Yeah,
You've rented it for the week so we can have a proper look back.
There she is.
There it is.
And you can still lift it as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That's it.
And is that a replica, Johnny, or is that the real thing?
Well, that normally is a bit of a giveaway with the FIA bid on it. I've got my my Silverstone trophy and it doesn't have that underneath it, so I'm a bit sceptical. Flavio gave me a fake.
And here we have a man they brought in from Dublin, O'Flynn, to present the third place trophy to Rubens Barrichello. Ted Kravitz, Martin Brandl, Johnny Hurber, it has been an absolute delight to share this little look back at the European Grand Prix. Johnny and Martin, I'll ask you for one more comment about this race. Ted, you can go first.
I mean, it was great for Stewart Grand Prix. You know, they'd had success before. Rubens Barrichello was second in Monaco, I think 1997, in their very first year. They'd already made approaches to Ford. They were going to sell the team to Ford, but it was just such a great day. And as I say again, with Murray and Martin in the commentary box, once you saw Johnny, Johnny, all you needed was for everybody else to fall off the road, and they did. But once you were in the lead, you were never going to give it up, were you?
Absolutely. Martin, what was your overriding memory?
I was very happy for Johnny because he did keep it on the road where a lot of others didn't. And to finish first you must finish. And that man, Sir Jackie Stewart, is the man I most remember ever saying that, actually. So for him to be up there as well, a three-time world champion himself, driving for Ken Tyrrell, for example, of course. But it's just a good news story. My good friend and former teammate Rubens Barrichello up there as well. Our Sky F1 teammate Johnny Herbert wins the race. A very exciting race, very unpredictable. It's 21 years ago, but I do remember it well, and I enjoyed it.
Johnny, I could look back at this again and again and again. I'm sure you could too. How many times have you watched this race?
Yeah, a good few times. It's something that's always been enjoyable to watch all round. But I think the biggest thing is, I know you've all sort of mentioned it briefly, but Jackie, Paul, they put a brilliant team together. There was a real family feel to it, and I think that was what enabled them to do such a brilliant job with the help of Ford and Cosworth. Yes, of course, but I think the whole package was just wonderful to be a part of, and I think that was just lovely for them to get that win before it sort of moved on to Jaguar for 2000.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. And to you all, thanks very much for looking back at Johnny's final race win with us all. Stay safe and we'll see you soon.